Okay.
I think you're streaming now. It says live.
Give me a couple minutes. Not seeing anything on there now. Oh, there we are. We got 2 people watching. That's good.
I'll mute myself until it's my turn, just to avoid any feedback.
Yeah. So we can't see who's watching though, right? Is that correct?
Right. They're just watching on the YouTube, so we don't see them. Do not disturb, so my phone doesn't ring. 2 people watching.
I'll mute myself until it's my turn, just to avoid any feedback.
So we can't see. Right.
Right. They're just watching on the YouTube. We don't see. Okay, I think I'm ready to start here. I assume I can be heard. This is the second webinar Preservation Foresight is presenting this year in our virtual presence online. This one will be about national and local designations. We've got 2 experts here with us today. Michelle McCullough with the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Historic Resource Officer, and Jennifer Brose, who's the National Register Coordinator with the North Carolina State Historic Preservation Office. So we'll be going through their presentations in just a minute. Just reminding everybody, there's lots of reasons we claim that preservation is valuable. Saving our history is sort of the top of the list for most of us, but there's lots of other reasons too. We've tried to hit some of these through our series, and talking about materials will be one of our next episodes about clay tile roofing. But we also have housing and uniqueness and energy savings. They're also good preservation goals. The general preservation process, if you're not familiar with it, there's typically 5 steps that are used in the process. From survey, which starts with the whole, basically everything that's around you, and then trying to narrow that down to what should be designated. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Preservation after that is in the next big step, which most often relies on the owner of the property to move forward with that. We'll be talking more about those middle 3. Survey sort of broader, and Jennifer may mention that because the state typically handles most of that and helps fund those at each local level. But then the identification, evaluation, and finally the designation is where the National Register and local landmarks are handled. And the reason those are important, the economic reason that historic tax credits are available for properties that are designated, both income and non-income in North Carolina. Also, conservation easements don't have to be designated, but it's a lot simpler if they are. Again, if they're designated, your property tax has to be a local landmark if you want 50% off, or the federal designation to get those tax credits for work done on your property. So we're going to start now. Jennifer's going to take over the screen and tell us about the National Register in North Carolina. And stop this.
All right, thank you so much. I will load up my presentation in just a moment. Okay. All right, can you see the PowerPoint okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, so as David mentioned, I am Jen Brose, I'm the National Register Coordinator at the North Carolina State Historic Preservation Office. I'll be giving you an overview of the National Register of Historic Places, focusing on how the National Register is different from local designation process. The National Register of Historic Places is a federal program of the National Park Service administered by state historic preservation offices. The National Park Service defines the National Register as the nation's official list of places worth preserving. In North Carolina, more than 3,050 non-archaeological National Register properties have been listed, including roughly 525 historic districts. Counting all of the contributing properties in the districts, roughly 75,000 contributing North Carolina resources are listed. The National Register was created by the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. The act arose with growing public concern about how to protect key historic places in the built environment from demolition in the name of progress, especially for highways and urban renewal, as well as other modern development. Eligible properties are those generally at least 50 years old. They can be significant at the local, state, or national level. There's sometimes confusion because of the name of the National Register, that it might have to be something nationally important. That's just not the case. In North Carolina and in other states, most properties listed in the National Register are of local historic significance. So what are the criteria we use to assess eligibility? Well, there are 4. First, we have criterion A. This is for association with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. For example, here we see a Rosenwald-funded school that meets criterion A in the areas of education and ethnic heritage for its contributions to the education of African-American students in rural Durham County during the period of racial segregation. Criterion B is for association with the productive lives of significant persons in our history. The Nash House, shown here, is significant for its association with prominent architect Arthur Cleveland Nash, who designed and constructed this Chapel Hill home in 1922 and occupied it while he worked as an architect during a major expansion period for the university. Criterion C is for properties that embody distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master, or that possess high artistic values. The 1963 Midtown Motor Lodge, which meets criterion C for architecture, is an intact example of the modern style motor-in building type, utilizing curtain wall construction. Lastly, criterion D is for information potential. This is usually associated with archaeological sites. Some types of properties are generally not eligible for the National Register unless they meet special considerations. These are known as criterion considerations. I won't go into great detail because that could be another presentation in and of itself, but just know there are certain property types that are more difficult to list than others. So what types of resources are eligible for the National Register? We list buildings, structures, sites, and objects. Properties can be individually listed or listed in districts. Historic districts have a significant concentration of resources linked by their common historic association. So, for example, a mill village, a mixed commercial and residential district representing historic significance in community development and planning. You might have a commercial core significant in the area of commerce, or a residential district significant for its historic residential architecture, or even rural historic districts. Within a historic district, resources are labeled as contributing or non-contributing for the National Register. A contributing resource adds to the historic significance of a property or district, and they're eligible for all the benefits of listing, just like an individually listed property. Non-contributing resources were either constructed outside the period of significance, or they've been substantially altered. District boundaries include the full extent of the contiguous historic property as determined by the selected criteria and areas of significance. To be eligible for listing, resources also must have intact historic integrity, meaning the property retains sufficient original aspects of location, design, materials, workmanship, setting, feeling, and association to convey its historic significance. So why do people pursue National Register listing? National Register listing is primarily an honorary designation. It's a way to recognize a property's historic significance to the community and a way to recognize and celebrate our heritage. It's a helpful education and planning tool. It has also become a tool for economic development. So let's break down what the National Register does and does not do, and how it differs from local historic designation, which Michelle will talk more about in a moment. National Register does provide an honorary designation. It does help with government planning processes. So there are limited protections from federally funded and permitted development. Federal agencies are responsible for considering historic properties when conducting a project. It is not only for National Register listed properties, but the agencies also consider properties that are eligible for the National Register. So either or. Here's a similar process at the state level, where the state considers properties that are listed in the National Register to try to avoid harmful effects. The National Register does list properties only if they meet the criteria for listing and the private owner or majority of private owners, in the case of the district, agree to the listing. It does allow the public to nominate public property. And it does make the public aware of historic resources by documenting them thoroughly. The National Register for qualified projects can create opportunities to apply for historic preservation incentives, such as tax credits, which David mentioned earlier. And it does stimulate economic development. What does it not do? The National Register does not limit or restrict the rights of private property owners to use, develop, or sell their historic property. It does not affect the title to the property. It does not require that historic properties be maintained, repaired, or restored. It does not require historic properties to be open to the public. And it does not prevent change or demolition. And this is something that I think we'll be focusing on, especially as Michelle begins to talk about local designation. There is sometimes a misconception that to prevent something from changing or being demolished, we have to get it listed in the National Register. But National Register is primarily honorary, and it cannot prevent a private owner from doing what they wish to private property. National Register listing, as we said, is not the same as local designation. The National Register is non-regulatory and provides little protection for properties beyond attempts to avoid harm through environmental review. Properties with local designations, as Michelle will talk about, are regulated by local preservation ordinances. Often the two programs are confused because many areas have both designations, often with slightly different boundaries. If ever anyone has any questions about whether their property might be on the National Register or locally listed, we encourage you to reach out to the State Historic Preservation Office and to Michelle McCullough at the Planning Office, just to double check, and we can help sort that out. We also have some amazing GIS tools for people who love to look at maps to check out the status of their property. The greatest attraction to National Register listings, especially since the late 1990s, with changes in state tax credits, is availability of financial incentives. A revised version of the state rehabilitation tax credits went into effect in 2020. So our office offers workshops and trainings specifically focused on preservation incentives. And the point person for Forsyth County is Mitch Wilds. He works in our restoration branch, and I have put his phone and email right here in the slide if you wish to contact him. So briefly, the steps for National Register. The National Register listing process is generally a 1 to 2 year process, depending on the complexity of the property, the experience of the nomination author, and the number of nominations in line for processing at the state. The process is very technical, and we do encourage people to seek out professional consultants to author nominations most efficiently. We have a National Register Advisory Committee in North Carolina. They meet 3 times a year to consider the eligibility of properties for the National Register. Before someone begins a National Register nomination, though, there's a preliminary step in North Carolina. Someone will fill out what is called a study list application, and it gives our office a little background about why they think a property might be eligible for the National Register. So we'll review that and present it to the National Register Advisory Committee. And if they approve it, it's placed on the study list. It's sort of a green light to proceed with National Register listing. If something has been study listed quite some time ago, 10 years, 5 years, it's always good to check in with the Historic Preservation Office to see if it's still eligible before proceeding with the nomination, just to make sure that it hasn't changed over time or there aren't any red flags. So we're here to help with that process. So someone drafts a National Register nomination and submits it to the State Historic Preservation Office. We assist them with review and editing. It's scheduled again for the National Register Advisory Committee at the state level. Once they approve it, it goes up to the National Park Service. The National Park Service has final say over what's listed in the National Register. So at this time, we can either take some questions, or I can hand it off to Michelle, who will talk about our local designations, and then we can do questions at the end.
David, do you have a preference, or are you seeing any questions?
I haven't seen any questions. I think we can go ahead and move on, and we'll see if anybody posts anything, but I'm monitoring the chat on the YouTube channel. So if anybody does have questions there, go ahead and post them there.
Okay.
Oh, you already started. Okay. I was going to introduce you, but
Oh, okay.
go
Good.
introduce yourself.
No, go ahead. But I'd rather my picture not be up there.
Well, hang on just a second. I think that's showing up now. Yeah, Jennifer's gone through the National Register, and we did do a previous video about tax credits, both income and non-income producing, as well as covenants. So if you look back at our channel, there's a previous presentation which Mitch and David Christenberry from the state talked, and then we also had one of our board members talk about it too. So I don't know if people have questions about it. Hopefully this will make sense as we go forward now. What local designation does, it's different. It's a similar process, and Michelle will probably cover that as the designating them. But once they're designated, there's a whole different set of rules which apply. And I'm sorry for the construction outside if you're hearing that. So Michelle, you want to go ahead and take the screen?
Okay. Alrighty, am I up? Can you say that? Great. Alrighty, well, I'm so glad Jen did exactly what I wanted her to do. There's a lot of parallels with National Register and local designation. There's some differences. So she covered a lot of great stuff that I'm just gonna make mention to and go from there. So what I'm gonna talk about is I'm gonna get a little bit more into the nitty gritty about process and things like that. We're gonna talk about the designation process, the application report, that's required, and then some benefits of why you'd want to landmark a property and not just National Register, and then what are the requirements to have a landmark. So we will go from there. See if I can get this to work. Okay. There we go. And throughout my slide presentation, Forsyth County has over 140 local historic landmarks. So you'll be seeing pictures of a lot of our landmarks, not every one of them, but a lot of them. The North Carolina General Statutes allows local communities to establish a local historic landmark program. To be able to do that, you have to have what's called a commission of some sort. It can be, in a lot of areas, it's called a historic resource commission, district commission, a landmark commission. Some people have any number of those. What we're going to be talking about today is you usually have to have a resource or a landmark commission to do these landmarks. So somebody to watch over these properties, because unlike National Register, once you have designated a local landmark, we do watch what happens to that structure or that building or that site. So you have to have a commission. They have to have rules of procedure, and they have to be established, and they have to do design review. So once that's established, a commission can then have a landmark program, and they usually create it in their ordinance. And both our city and county ordinances have all the necessary information to allow us to do that. At a state level, and I'm going to talk mostly from the Forsyth County perspective, but at a state level, what we're charged with doing is a lot of times, a lot of commissions go out there and actually look for properties that they feel would be especially significant in their local areas. And they go after creating those landmarks, having them apply for them. In Forsyth County, we really want the property owners to come to us. We have a survey, an updated survey of our historic properties. And we have 2 staff people in our office that both of us at any time are able to talk to someone about landmarking. But typically we require the people to bring an application and report to us. So it can be the property owner, it can be an interested party. Typically you really want the property owner to be involved in this. It's not required, but it really, if they are against it, it's not going to work out well in the end usually. It can be a building, a structure, a site, an area, an object. We don't do districts as landmarks. They are just an individual property. And they request applications that we hold at our offices. We do not have that application online just because we like to make sure we give that to someone and we explain the project and we explain the program and the process that it will have to go through. It doesn't have to be listed on the National Register to be a local landmark. So if you haven't gone through the process that Jen just talked about, but you think, I think I want to be a landmark after you hear this, you could just go through the landmark process. In Forsyth County, there is an application fee. It's only $50. So if you go to other counties, our fee is really low, which it could be changing, but we do have a fee to process these applications. I'm going to start at that application and the report that's required. Online, there's a strict form application portion, which is like your name, address, serial number, what style it is, all of those kind of parts and pieces in an easy form that you fill in. But we also require a report, and that's required by state statute too, so that you really have to, this is kind of seen, I like to tell people, like the end all be all report to designating a property. We want to know everything we can about this property. So it's a pretty extensive report that's required. And when people are interested in the program, I like to give them examples of what has been done in the past. We have some really great consultants that have submitted some really good reports. So we're fortunate to have that. Like Jen said, for National Register, a lot of times you do want to hire a professional consultant to do this work because of the amount of material that's required. You'll want an introduction, property description, And again, you want to describe the whole property, the site, the exterior, the interior. And we're going to talk about that. Landmarking, you can designate exterior, interior, and site. And that's going to be very important what you do designate, but I'll talk about that in a minute. You'll want to talk about what restoration or rehabilitation activities have happened on this site. If you've gone through the tax program, the rehabilitation tax credit program, it's great to just add that whole application to your application so that it's right there. You don't have to rewrite anything. You have everything down what you did and that sort of thing. So we see how the building had changed throughout time, what changes had to be made, what routine maintenance was done. The two big parts of the application are the statement of significance and integrity statement, which Jen mentioned. We do have a historical background, architectural context in Forsyth County. Our application allows that if they've done a National Register nomination and it's younger than 5 years, we will let you submit that instead of rewriting another document. And as Jen said, exceptional importance statements. So if the building is under 50 years old, if it is a graveyard, if it is one of these other things, we have a whole section to help you write out that special importance statement for our commission to review. So as I said, the two big things are the statement of significance and the integrity. This is really what's going to determine whether this property can be a local historic landmark. And I'm not going to go, Jen did a great job of going through them. So it's the same criteria as was with the National Register. We do not have a separate criteria. It's the same A, B, C, and D that Jen mentioned. And the integrity is the same 7, the location, design, setting, workmanship, materials, feeling, association. With the significance, you have to at least meet one of those. With integrity, you have to at least meet a majority of those. So, and typically when you're going for landmark status, you do meet at least, I've never seen one come in that didn't meet at least 5 integrity items. The other required supporting documents to an application, we need to know the property's boundary. So it's great if you get a tax map and put it on there, but you've got to describe your boundaries, what you're including in your landmark. If you have outbuildings, if you have site features, is there a historic wall? Is there a water feature? Is there a landscape feature like a landscape architecturally designed garden or something? All of those features have to be described within the boundaries and depicted on maps and described. Also giving their significance and their relation to the building and why they're important. Photographs. We are going to want to see as many historic photographs as you can get because we want to see how the building has changed through time and what it looked like originally. We want to see how the site has changed, how the context of where it's located is. Did it used to be out there in the country and now the suburbs have gone around it? All those kind of things. So we want to see historic photos and then up-to-date photographs of the whole site and the building, whatever you're designating. And how we go about our standards for those is we use the state standards for photography. So, and those are online, and I put that in there too. But they can be found at the State Historic Preservation Office website. Maps are going to be very important. And again, we'll talk about it in a minute for the tax office especially, which are going to have clear defined boundaries. And it's great if you can make it meet the lot and block or pin, whichever you're in right there. But sometimes the landmark isn't the whole site. That's a lot and block on our zoning map. So then that's why it's very important to depict where you want and then what features are included in those. So the top map that you see shows all the details of that and shows where the outbuildings are and shows where the main house is. And then you also can see in that aerial photograph what the vegetation looks like and that sort of thing. The bottom photograph is part of our GIS, is part of our tax maps. The brown outline is what ended up being local landmarked. So we want to make sure we show those. And then you need a bibliography. And I will tell you, I just got a call the other day from a person asking me from a 1998 application where one of the sources was for a bit of information. So the bibliography is very important. How did you come up with the history? Where did the information come from? Where did your details come from? It's a very important part. So you get your application all done. You've got your report all written. You're ready to submit it. You submit it to staff. staff goes through it and sees if there's anything missing. Is there any changes? Do we think we need some more supporting information? And we hand it back to you. You resubmit it to us. And then the process, we have to send it. It's required that we send it to the State Historic Preservation Office. They get 30 days and they get to review and comment on this application. So that's, and again, it's just a comment period, but it also is, it's helpful for our commission to get these comments, because what it says is they're looking at it through their eyes of all of these properties and that they've seen come in for National Register and stuff, and they can help us determine, oh, I think you're missing something here or something like that. If they feel it meets our criteria, it has significance and it's got integrity, we typically get a nice letter back, and it says something like they believe the application provides the Preservation Commission and local governing boards with clear statement of integrity, significance, the boundaries justified, and the history and architectural context are provided are thorough. That's the most positive we're going to get. They're never going to say, yes, landmark this one, but they give us enough to at least tell us we've got all that we need to do to make the decision, which is a great help. Once we get that, the next step is to go to public hearing. So the first step is to go to the Historic Resource Commission. That's what we have here in Forsyth County. We have a Historic Resource Commission that combines both our local districts and our landmarks. The commission holds a public hearing. We do a presentation on the application, and then they find whether it meets that significance integrity threshold. They then just make a recommendation. So far, we have not gone to an approval body yet. They send it on to the appropriate elected body. So if it's in the city of Winston-Salem, you're going to be sending it to City Council, Winston-Salem City Council. If it's in the unincorporated areas of Forsyth County, you're going to be sending it to the county commissioners. About 5 years back, the county commissioners signed an interlocal agreement with many of our small towns, Louisville, Bethania, Rural Hall, giving them the authorization to review and approve landmarks in their municipalities. So Walkertown, Clemens, Kernersville, they all, if the landmark application comes in for that, it will not go to county commissioners, it will go to the small town elected officials. And they will be the voting body on that they'll make that final determination. They can make 3 type of designations. They can either adopt the designation ordinance as proposed. They can adopt it with some changes. So the Historic Resource Commission typically looks at it just through that preservation historic eye. Doesn't meet significance, doesn't meet the integrity. When you get to the elected bodies, they typically feel they have a larger mission. So they will look at tax basis, and they'll look at a lot of different things. They can look at anything. So they may feel a property can be designated for the exterior, but why are we giving it for the interior if they are making it condos? So sometimes they change the designation and just designate a portion of it. So they amend the ordinance and only designate what they feel is necessary. Or they can reject the proposal outright and not designate it. After it's designated and there is an ordinance created, that ordinance goes to a lot of different people. So it's kept on record so that people know, and then the pros and cons, the carrot and the stick can happen after this point. Of course, the owner and the applicant and the occupant of the landmark property will get a copy of the ordinance. Historic staff is deemed with the job to go down and register it with the deeds office at Forsyth County, and they index it in certain ways, a couple different ways, so that it can be found. So that if someone sells their property, they know that they have a local historic landmark. The inspections division gets it because we are going to watch and monitor what work is done to the house. So, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Any city, county, village, town, whatever, any clerk in the town is going to get a copy so that they can make it available to the public. One other step we've gone to is if you look at our Historic Resource Commission's website and you look under the landmarks, we have a big chart and it lists every landmark, all 140 of them. And we have where you can look up your ordinance is connected right there. So if you're a new homeowner of a landmark and you're like, I can't find that ordinance anywhere, and for some reason Michelle's not picking up her phone, you could go right online and their ordinance would be right there. So, and then it also has an information sheet about the property, which is a historic sheet, which is great. It just gives information and some photos. And then it gives the actual original application. So that's all online for everybody. So we did that. So the clerk's office could also tell people you can go right online and get it. We highly suggest any new homeowner, when you purchase a landmark, make sure you get a copy of that ordinance and you take it down if you're interested in that tax deferral, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and take it down to the tax office. Because the tax assessor or the supervisor is also one of those people who's required to get this, because they have to keep track. Because if they give the 50% tax deferral, they have to know what was designated as the landmark, what part of the site, which buildings, all of that information. And then it's required to be on any tax map. Like I showed you earlier, that brown outline is on, you can see it on GeoData. Any map we have, because we don't have in Forsyth County a set of maps that are called tax maps, but any public map we have, we try to put it on there. Also, like the National Register, local landmarking doesn't do anything about permitted uses that are allowed. So if your property is zoned to be an office building, you can be an office building. We are not going to get into the uses of the building. So that's similar to the National Register program. So again, why would you want to do a landmark program? Why would you want to do this and not National Register? And again, like National Register, it's an honorary thing at first, because the property is showing that it deserves recognition and protection. It's an important part of our community. And for local landmarking, you can make something that really is just an important part of your community, and you feel it meets the cultural criteria, and you're like, we really want to show people that we want this protected. So this is a program that does that. One of the biggest carrots in this program is it's one of the last pots of gold in the preservation field that people can actually get a monetary return. And that is, an owner is eligible to apply for up to a 50% property tax deferral on any designated portion of the property and site. Up to 50% on designated portions. And I repeat that because here in Forsyth County, it is up to the tax assessor to determine how much tax deferral is given. If you designate just the exterior and the site, like this picture of the Winston Tower you see, that's how that building is designated, just the exterior and actually the first floor, but not all the other levels, not the interior. They do not get a full 50%. They get about 10 to 15, to be honest. So it's very important that you know when you're applying, what do you want to apply for and how that will affect that tax deferral. So you will not automatically here in Forsyth County get 50%. But if you designate the whole enchilada, the inside, the outside, the site, everything, you typically get 50%. And that 50% of your property taxes is supposed to help you maintain that property. It's to help you keep that slate roof on there. You know, we want it to stay. We want it to keep that integrity that enabled it to be listed. Now, where's the stick for this program? That's a great carrot to have. The stick is that, remember I mentioned that term design review. Well, the commission then, and after anything's landmarked, after a building or site's landmarked, they are required to work with the property owner. And anytime any work is done to the property on any designated portion, exterior, interior, or site, they are required to get what's called a certificate of appropriateness for that work. We do have categories of work: major work, minor work, or routine maintenance. A major work project would be something like new construction. You're making an addition. You want to take out and put new windows in, and you want to put a new type of window, not what was historically accurate or historically there. Those big projects that would change the character of that building or that site. Minor work, or in some areas you would hear them call administrative changes. This is when staff can review them. Staff can only approve COAs, so we cannot deny something. So it's going to be something that meets the set of guidelines that have been created, and that's a smaller project. And then we do a routine maintenance. You want to paint it, and you're going to paint it the same color, please paint the building. And we want these buildings to last. So we do try to make it easy on you to make repairs that are appropriate. The picture I have on the right is the cover to the guidelines that we have here in Winston-Salem. And They're not as specific as you might think because we have such a broad range of landmarks. As you can see on the cover, we have a Shell station, we have a cemetery, we have an industrial building, and we have a little church. So there's such a variety. So they're typically very much like the standards. It kind of gives you the 10. I always call them the top 10, and you go from there. But we do have a set of guidelines. They're on our website. I like to mention that one of the biggest things that you do have to get a COA for is demolition. And the one thing is a lot of people think landmarking can stop demolition. Well, not in the state of North Carolina. However, we do get the ability at the commission level to at least hold a demolition for 365 days. In that period of time, what we're hoping to do is either move the house or building, get a new owner, or work with the property owner and say, what difficulties are you having? Why do you want to demolish this property? And so we can work with them to try to save this landmark property. We also, if it comes down to somebody really does want to demolish a structure, we work with our local preservation group, Preservation for Life. We work with them to try to get the word out, try to find somebody that can help the owner. We work with a statewide nonprofit, Preservation North Carolina. So we can't stop demolition either in this case, if it's just locally designated, but at least we have a tool where we can stop for a whole year and we get an opportunity to intervene and try to work with. And again, as I said, landmarking, there's a wide variety of landmarks. So the critical thing to think of is if you really think your building has special significance and has the integrity and really should be valued in our community, make sure you also want to make sure that you want to meet those criteria when it comes to making repairs, and make sure you're ready to do the documentation of it. But we have all sorts of properties here in Forsyth County. And I can be reached anytime. I like to tell people who are new landmark owners or old landmark owners, I'm not your best friend, I'm your property best friend. Call me up anytime for a play date and I'll be there. So I'm willing to help and answer any questions you have.
Yeah, we got people watching, but no one's posted any questions that I see in the chat. One thing, Michelle, you talked about the local landmarks don't affect use. Do you want to sort of address the one exception for the H districts?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Okay, I guess.
Regulate use.
So here in Forsyth County, I kind of separated out, but there's a good chunk of our landmarks that are located in Old Salem or Bethabara. In Old Salem and Bethabara, we're really fortunate here that we have what's called H districts. They're actual historic districts. That's the zoning. It's not an overlay. You don't have like an RSQ or an LO zoning. You have an H. And in those situations, when you have a building that is located in Old Salem or Bethabara in one of our H districts, plus is a landmark, then the use will be, you will have to meet certain district requirements. So you can't put in a use that didn't occur between the period of significance for Old Salem or Bethabara. Now, there are a few exceptions, again, if you're the school, the church, or Old Salem, but that is the only time, thank you, David, for bringing up that use is considered and can be affected.
Yeah, that's unusual. Most
And that's actually not because of the
else.
landmark status, though. It's because of the historic district status.
The H district, yeah, versus overlay, which is what most places that have just the overlay over the existing zoning.
That's a whole nother presentation.
Yeah, exactly. Then I think Jennifer, maybe the CLG designated are still, I believe, eligible for the tax credits. Is that not right? That if they're not on the National Register, if it's the CLG, which what's the name Forsyth County is, it's a federally recognized and meets the standards. I believe that still can make it eligible for tax credits. Is that not right?
I would think you still have to list it on the
Yeah.
National Register.
Can you repeat the question?
Are CLG designated local landmarks, districts, contributing resources also eligible for tax credits, even if it's not yet listed on the National Register?
So the as far as tax credits, the income producing tax credits, that's a national program, and it has to be certified historic, listed on the National Register, or contributing in a National Register district,
Okay.
or in the process of heading in that direction, where they can certify it on the front end with the restoration folks through a Part 1 process. And then if it's kind of converse for the non-income producing residential credits, the state is certifying at the back end of the project that it is historic. So again, they're looking for something that's contributing or individually listed in the National Register. But if you have specific questions about that, do talk to it about the timing, and that do talk to also restoration, and we'll pair together to get everybody conversing about the plans, the timelines, what might work, what might not work. It's always better to check in early and often just to see what the possibilities might be.
Right. And the other thing, I think it's important to reinforce that you talked about eligibility for National Register imposes the same requirements as being listed, which is not for local landmarks. Unless you're designated, then I think unless it's being proposed, you're waiting for the process to complete, there aren't any restrictions yet. It has to be set in place. But with the National Register, it was due to that's how it was first set up, and owner consent was not required originally, and there's some other issues that they adjusted it. So even without owner consent, it can be eligible and still under the federal actions, it's still treated as historic property if it has never been listed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's something that's sometimes misunderstood, that federal agencies in federal law, they're responsible for considering their effect on historic properties, just trying to avoid or to mitigate their impacts of their projects. Because also we have this other processes with tax credits and federal tax credits and federal National Register. So how do these programs work together and not conflict with each other? So if there's a federal project, the agency is people surveying on the ground. They're just looking for in the project area what's potentially eligible, what they might need to try to avoid. But even if it is a federally funded project, that doesn't mean that something isn't going to change, or sometimes there's circumstances where it's not feasible to avoid it, and so they get into places where they're trying to mitigate the effects, the impacts. They may not be able to avoid, for whatever circumstances, what needs to happen, and so then they're working with their office to see how to offset that impact, and perhaps work to fund a survey or do something else to sort of offset the effects. So it's really just all part of a big planning process, and they're planning for things that are both eligible or listed. Obviously, if it's already listed, it becomes more obvious in that planning process. So that's good, but no, don't think that just when you list something that kicks into the planning process, because it's already going to happen, whether or not it's listed in the National Register.
Right. Because normally let's call the 106 process, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's the federal regulation that says you have to consider impacts, but then every federal project usually identifies area of potential effect, and then they do a survey within there, and obviously they look at what's already listed on the National Register, or the state has already determined, or what's locally designated. But they're supposed to survey everything and make sure there's nothing that's maybe not listed that still should be considered, especially for more recent. I mean, this is something I'm on the National Register Advisory Committee, that there's a big push to recognize cultural and other sort of non-traditional resources that, not a big fancy house somewhere that everybody can say, oh, that's a great house, we have to save it. But there may be something that's a lot less, easily identifiable that has significance, and whether it's local or broader, that should be looked at. I know one example I could think off the top of my head is Sam Dotman's former house and store, which I think a lot of people already have a definite affinity for, that there's a pretty significant, artist both locally and nationally. So if something were to happen there, that'd be something that the survey would hopefully identify, something that you might not think is more just a little 20th century storefront, but actually had, significant individuals and cultural associations with that property. I don't see any questions. Either of you have anything else to follow up on? No? I'm going to share my screen back here again. It's probably cut off just to make sure. But I appreciate our two experts joining us today. And so we've had some people watching, and I'm sure we'll have some more come back later and watch. And we're hoping this is sort of a resource to, people can, come and look at later on, not just have to watch it live, but come back when it's convenient too. Maybe get some basic information, and obviously Preservation Forsyth, as well as all these government, representatives are always available to try and help people answer questions. We do have a couple sessions coming up. We're working on something with the North Carolina room, actually, how to research your historic property. So there'll be several of us that are going through, here's Sanborn maps and city directories, and here's some of your basic resources. If you want to research your house or property, whatever it is, here's some places to start looking. Again, the North Carolina room, the libraries will be working with us to talk about what they've got available, and we'll be talking about other ones. We'll be talking about historic roofing materials, specifically tile roofs, which are so unusual, but common in Winston-Salem. Both the green tile roofs at Renolda, as well as the clay tile roofs in Old Salem. And then also we're trying to set up a session with Partners for Sacred Places about historic churches, how to, maybe look at issues that churches suffered from when they have old buildings to care for. In some ways have been found to deal with those properties. We're working a series of different things that we hope people find of interest. And again, we'll be posting these on YouTube. And we did get a response. Someone said, very informative. Thank you all. So yes, we do have live people out there listening to us now, which is encouraging. Again, we have people will follow up with us later. And if there's any questions, Preservation Forsyth, State Preservation Office, or the Historic Resource Commission, I know are all available and willing to help answer any questions. Go through historic properties. So if there's no one else has anything, I'll say thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.